evening. Welcome to our Bible study tonight. I'm so glad to be able to connect with everybody in this way tonight. And I need to send out a notice for urgent prayer. Many of you know that Phil Parkey has been in the hospital at Duke since January. He had a double lung transplant, and we had all the hope in the world that he was going to be able to come home and be whole, and that has just not happened. Last night, Phil took a turn for the worse, and it appears that his passing is imminent. So please pray for Phil Parkey and his lovely wife Janet, who is by his side and is hurting. So we will keep the Parkeys in our prayers, and I will keep you updated on that. Tonight we are continuing a series of looking at the people in the Old Testament that are important to our religion. In this case, we're going to look at the person of Rebekah. You would know Rebekah as the wife of Isaac and the mother of Jacob and Esau. And we tend to have a kind of fifth grade Sunday school understanding of people like this in the Bible, as if she was just someone who helped steal the birth order from Esau and give it to Jacob. That's the general story that we know about Rebekah. But there's something much more important about this whole story. We have to be reminded when we are reading these Old Testament stories, particularly in the first few books, that Judaism was very much in its infancy during this time. And so there are these turning points along the way that, had things gone another way, could have wiped out Judaism as a religion. And so these pivotal moments are very important for us to understand. And Rebekah really reflects one of those. And so I'm so glad to share this with you tonight about, not just our four fathers in our faith, but our four mothers and the critical roles that they played during this time. Well, all of us learn to appreciate more fully what Jesus saw so clearly 2,000 years ago, that the words male and female, they're adjectives, not nouns, that human being and person are the authentic normative terms, he says. He says, I feel her contribution to our religious heritage was absolutely enormous and largely unrecognized or appreciated. She may have had as much to do with keeping the traditions of Abraham alive as any other single person. That is an incredible way to put it. So we know Rebekah's husband was Isaac, and we know that Isaac was the son of Abraham. And we know the story where Abraham was called to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Moriah, and at the last moment God provided a ram in his place. But you can imagine how that must have affected Isaac. It appears that he was not very much of a religious person as he grew older, and this traumatic experience may have been why. I'll never forget being in the seminary, and I had a buddy who was just an incredible scholar. He was always carrying around a stack of books, and he took a class at a neighboring seminary, which many of us did from time to time. I did it one time. But in this case, he was taking a class with a bunch of Jewish scholars. And in this class, they talked about this story of Abraham and Isaac. And somebody pointed out something to him that I'll never forget. He said that there was a very strict structure in making an altar in order to burn a sacrifice. And because they knew the order of that, they knew that the fire must have been lit before Isaac was placed on the altar. And so it was this idea that before God provided this ram for something else, that he must have smelled the burning flesh of his own son. And that just made that story so much more alive to me. And in this instance, I think it's important to realize what that experience, how that experience may have impacted Isaac later on, to not necessarily be the religious one the way that Rebekah was, and then how that affected their relationships with their sons. So you know what the stories are like in the Old Testament of women and how they were judged on whether or not they could conceive children, and particularly sons. It was very important to their culture. So you can imagine uh, how long they awaited to have an heir, and then lo and behold, they find out that they are pregnant with twins, and you can imagine that Rebecca must have been ecstatic. But we find out that she began to have a painful pregnancy, and there was a lot of the word that was used was turmoil in her womb. And so what began as a very happy occasion, she began to have this painful pregnancy. And but the Bible says about her is very reflective of her character, that she went to God in prayer and, quote, inquired of the Lord of what this might mean. And here's the answer that was given in Genesis 25. There are two nations in your womb. Your issue will be two rival people. One nation shall have the mastery of the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. Now that's very important to remember for what is coming later on in the story. He says, Rebekah never forgot that word from Yahweh, and what she heard explains many of the things she did in the future that appear on the surface to be little more than personal preference of one son over the other. He says this meant that she knew that God had something in store for her, that she was going to play a role in something important. He says Rebekah was led in on a mystery that defied the customs of that day, which decreed that the firstborn male was automatically to be the leader of the clan. That's something that we look through our present lens as not being a big deal, but it was a very big deal back then. The oldest son was to be the leader of the clan. And so when she has the babies, Esau emerged first from the womb, with Jacob right behind, prophetically holding his brother's foot. The sons were very different. Esau was described as a hairy man, and he was an outdoorsman and extrovert. Jacob, on the other hand, was a smooth man. He's described. He was an introvert, and he was a thinker. And it says that his mother and he was like his mother in the fact that he had developed more intellectually and intuitively than physically. So not surprising, Isaac was more drawn to Esau, and Rebekah found it easier to be close to Jacob and to help him in any way that she could. Well, so the time comes for the patriarchal blessing. And remember, by this time, Isaac was blind, so he could not see. And this is the famous part of the story where they trick Isaac into thinking that Jacob is Esau. Now, I love the way Dr. Claypool describes this. He says, now, by all common sense moral standards, what they did was a blatant deception and manipulation that can only be called indefensible. Yet, in light of a larger good, keeping alive the tradition of Abraham, their actions take on a very different moral tenor. And in other words, that this was the critical moment when, had things gone off in a different direction, it literally could have led to the demise of Judaism. But remember the cultural focus on this. Their tradition was that the older son should always be the leader of the clan, and that had become what he described as a hardened absolute, and in this case, simply not relevant. He says, in this family, as in many others, giftedness was not a matter of birth order. It was Jacob, not Esau, who had the gifts and inclination to carry on the religious and cultural tradition Abraham had begun. And he said, I find myself applauding our foremother Rebekah for her courage and willingness to go against the grain of culture in order to be faithful to a higher law of fulfillment. That is so beautifully worded and so important. She was becoming a part of something that was bigger than her own life. And it's reflective of the passage that says we must obey God rather than men. He says the traditions of Abraham, had they been entrusted to Esau, they could have well withered up and died while he was out hunting and fishing. Isn't that amazing? He says, Jacob was the one created and ordained by God to pass on the saving tradition. So thanks be to God for our foremother Rebekah for the role she played in helping all of this come to pass as it did. And may the same God empower us all to be as courageous and perceptive as was our heroic foremother Rebekah. I hope this has found you well. I hope this gives you a more educated and adult insight into a very critical player in our religious tradition in Rebekah. Go in peace. God protect us until we meet again.